Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world, the paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The wizarding world operates under a quieter, but no less dangerous delusion in this timeline. That Ron Weasley is optional, a freckled accessory orbiting the boy who lived, useful for comic relief and chess, but ultimately replaceable. They are wrong. Harry Potter's legend is usually told as a duel of titans, Dumbledore and Voldemort, prophecy and power, light and dark, while Ron is filed away as the loyal sidekick whose absence would be tragic. Yes, but not structurally catastrophic. This episode proceeds with the opposite assumption, with methodical certainty, that Ron Weasley is the unseen, load-bearing pillar of the narrative, and that removing him is not a cosmetic edit, but a controlled demolition. So we begin with a montage. The Hogwarts Express, 1991. A skinny boy with a lightning scar sits alone in a compartment, the door never opening to admit a lanky redhead with dirt on his nose and corned beef sandwiches wrapped in waxed paper. No shared sweets, no quiet confession of being Harry, just Harry. The camera cuts to the sorting. There is no grinning boy in second-hand robes to shout across the hall that Harry should sit with him. No immediate Gryffindor anchor to drown out the hiss of the hat's whisper about ambition and survival. The bench is longer, colder. We jump to the underground chessboard. In canon, Ron's sacrifice is the emotional fulcrum of first year, a child's war game turned real as he offers his own body to clear Harry's path to the stone. Now, watch the same board without him. Hermione calculating alone, Harry advancing with no one willing to fall so he can move forward. The pieces still shatter, but the moment rings hollow, a victory stripped of soul resonance, strategy without heart. The burrow at Christmas dissolves next. No knitted jumper with an R, because there is no R at Harry's side to justify the invitation. The Weasley home does not become his fortress against Privet Drive. It remains someone else's world, glimpsed from the outside, its warmth, an abstraction rather than a lifeline. The Horcrux hunt follows in fast succession. The locket's poison words spiral around a campfire where Ron never storms out, because Ron never joined them. There is no jealous explosion, but there is also no shattered locket redeemed by a friend's return. Only Harry and Hermione, efficient, exhausted, tactically lethal. This is our premise. In this timeline, Harry never becomes friends with Ron on the train. A single missed seat, a single awkward silence, and the entire architecture of the war begins to warp. Alliances skew, house boundaries harden, the meaning of home for the chosen one collapses from a warm kitchen table into a locked bedroom door and a public pedestal. Across this episode, we will not treat this as a fluffy hypothetical. We will conduct an autopsy. Friendship will be examined as a structural spell, an invisible charm binding events, moderating power, humanizing prophecy. And we will ask, with clinical precision, what happens when that spell fails to cast? Without Ron's humour to puncture fame, without his jealousy to force confrontation, without his ordinary courage to model fallible loyalty, Harry's trajectory bends, not instantly into villainy, but toward isolation, emotional austerity, and a more calculated relationship with authority. The boy who lived becomes less a child among friends and more a weapon being polished in the dark by circumstance and expectation. How far that weapon cuts and whom it finally serves is the story we are about to dissect. Rewriting the train, the one conversation Harry never has. The hinge of this entire timeline is not a curse or a prophecy. It is the sound of a compartment door grinding back on its rail, and the decision of an 11-year-old boy about where to sit. Steam crowds the narrow corridor of the Hogwarts Express, turning the air into a wavering, metallic haze. In Canyon, Ron Weasley appears here as if summoned by narrative gravity. Awkward, freckled, carrying a corned beef sandwich and the easy warmth of someone who has never been truly alone. They are wrong to think that meeting was inevitable. In this timeline, a smaller, pettier sequence of events cuts across it with methodical certainty. Fred and George delay Ron, not with a prank, but with concern. They have heard the whispers about the boy who lived being on the train and, in their own way, try to rehearse him, to armour him with jokes he does not yet know how to land. While they stall him, a patrolling prefect, irritated by first years clogging the corridor, redirects the flow of children like a human dam. Harry, clutching Hedwig's cage and a bag of unfamiliar wizarding sweets, is nudged sideways into the first open compartment before shyness can make him retreat. It is not Ron waiting there. It is Hermione Granger, already in her robes, already with Hogwarts, a history open on her lap, or Neville Longbottom, eyes red from searching for a lost toad, or even Draco Malfoy, curious and rehearsed, hunting for the legend he has been promised. Whoever sits opposite, the geometry of the world tilts. The empty seat that once belonged to a laughing Weasley boy becomes a throne of influence. Harry at 11 is not the confident strategist of the Slytherin timeline. He is a child starved of kindness, trained by the Dursleys to expect that any social misstep will be punished with silence at best and confinement at worst. His psychology is brittle, hyper-attuned to first impressions, scanning every glance for mockery, without Ron's self-deprecating humour to normalize his ignorance. He does what neglected children often do when offered attention. He overcorrects toward whoever seems safest, strongest, or most structured. If it is Hermione who reaches him first, the conversation becomes an oral exam. She knows more, speaks faster, and radiates the authority of someone who has prepared for this moment with almost religious fervour. Harry, already ashamed of how little he understands, treats her explanations as lifelines. Knowledge becomes the price of belonging. He will pay it. If it is Draco, the tone shifts, polite, aristocratic, edged with quiet contempt for the wrong names. But the underlying dynamic is the same. Status becomes the price of safety. Here, we name the motif that will haunt this divergence. Not soul resonance with a dark guardian, but social gravity. The first person who truly orbits Harry on this train becomes his emotional north, the fixed star by which he will navigate questions of loyalty, class, and power. a masterpiece to be moulded, but this time by peers rather than by Bellatrix or Dumbledore. The train still races toward Hogwarts. The castle still waits on its cliff like a stone fortress above a black lake. But the boy in the compartment is already a different Harry, one who will never taste corned beef sandwiches in a crowded, laughing Weasley compartment, and whose first sorting will answer to a very different pull. What happens when that social gravity drags him toward books, bloodlines, or quiet desperation instead of red hair and chessboards is the next fracture we have to follow. Choosing a new North Star, Hermione, Draco, or no one at all. On the surface, the train still rattles north. The same grey sky smears past the glass, and the castle waits. The wizarding world would insist that, with or without a lanky redhead, Harry Potter will somehow find his people. They are wrong. In this timeline, his social gravity has 3 plausible poles, each a different kind of orbit, each a different kind of war inside his chest. Hermione's rigorous constellation of answers, Draco's glittering axis of blood and power, or the cold vacuum of no one at all. Which star he chooses will decide whether Hogwarts becomes a home, a fortress, or merely another institution that owns him. The first path is deceptively wholesome. Hermione reaches him, not with sweets, but with syllabi. Maybe she appears in the doorway of his compartment, already robed, already rehearsed, asking if he has tried any spells yet. Harry, who in canon was drawn to her competence but buffered by Ron's irreverence, now has no such cushion. He is impressed, faintly intimidated, and quietly desperate not to look ignorant. Safety, in her presence, begins to mean having the right book open, the right rule memorized, the right answer ready. Under that influence, the troll in the bathroom does not forge a friendship through reckless disobedience. It becomes a case study in procedural failure. Harry still runs toward danger. His canon impulse remains. But now he drags Hermione's encyclopedic mind with him, not Ron's chaotic courage. The lesson he takes away is not, we broke rules for someone we care about, but we survived because we prepared. Warmth is redefined as methodical certainty, affection measured in study sessions and perfectly color-coded timetables. A friend, in this model, is a living rulebook who keeps you from falling through the cracks. The second path coils back to Diagon Alley and inverts its power dynamic. Without Ron's bruised pride for Draco to mock, the Malfoy heir approaches Harry on the train as a tutor, not a bully. He offers a guided tour of pure-blood politics, a taxonomy of names to trust and names to crush. Harry, lacking any Weasley counterpoint, mistakes that aristocratic arrogance for unshakable confidence, and latches on. Here, belonging is granted through proximity to authority and old magic. Draco frames Slytherin not as a snake pit, but as a masterpiece to be moulded, a house that will teach Harry how the world really works. The sole resonance between Harry's buried anger and Draco's cultivated entitlement is dangerous. Loyalty becomes transactional. Humor is a weapon, and a good friend is someone who can make a room fall silent with a surname alone. The third path is the quietest and the darkest. Harry, overwhelmed by staring eyes and whispered legends, keeps choosing empty compartments and early bedtimes. He is polite, curious in class, even helpful, but never quite steps over the invisible line that turns conversation into confession. His fame solidifies into a glass wall instead of a bridge. People project onto him, but no one quite touches him. Without Ron's insecure jokes and clumsy, wholehearted loyalty, Harry's own insecurities have nowhere to spill safely. Silence hardens into habit. Hogwarts, in this branch of the Slytherin timeline, is not a riot of knitted jumpers and exploding snap. It is a stone labyrinth that trains him, grades him, and watches him, a fortress rather than a family. Each of these orbits rewires his definition of friendship. Replace Ron's easy laughter and sacrificial chessboard with Hermione's rigor or Draco's ambition, or with nothing at all, and you are no longer just changing who sits beside Harry at the feast. You are altering what he believes people are for: comfort, strategy, or distance. The next fracture is obvious. Once the hat touches his mind, which version of home will it hear? A Hogwarts without the burrow, redefining home for Harry. Once the hat has listened and the cheering fades, the real divergence is not the colour of Harry's tie, but the absence waiting for him at the end of term. In canon, that absence is drowned out by a kitchen full of shouting Weasleys, enchanted frying pans, and a clock that worries over him like a living creature. In this timeline, there is only stone and the echo of other people's departures. Visualize the split screen. On one side, soot-streaked Harry stumbling out of the burrow's fireplace, blinking at the chaos, Molly Weasley fussing over his weight, Ron laughing as gnomes sail over the hedge. On the other, Christmas at Hogwarts, trunks levitating toward the doors, owls shrieking overhead, and Harry standing very still in the entrance hall as the crowd thins. No one is shouting his name from a car outside. No one waves him toward a patched jumper waiting on his bed. The castle becomes a fortress and a mausoleum simultaneously, a place he haunts rather than a home he returns to. The reason is painfully simple. Without Ron as a bridge, Molly Weasley has no narrative that binds Harry to her table. She is still kind, still presses a mince pie into his hand at the platform, or asks after his classes, but there is no howler that risks public humiliation on his behalf. No lopsided cake, no annual ritual of knitted jumpers that declares, with embarrassing clarity, "You are one of mine now." The world assumes the boy who lived has found a family. They are wrong. For this, Harry, family remains an abstract noun, not a kitchen where you can slam the door and still be welcome at breakfast. Vacuum invites replacement. In the silence left by the burrow, other homes rise with methodical certainty. The library, with Hermione's meticulous notes and colour-coded revision schedules, offers safety through discipline. Affection is translated into study plans and exam strategies, a masterpiece of control rather than warmth. If Draco has become his anchor in the Slytherin timeline, the common room's green-lit gloom offers belonging that is explicitly transactional. Loyalty in exchange for advantage, camaraderie laced with class anxiety, and the constant audit of usefulness. Even Dumbledore's office, all whirring instruments and Phoenix song, is less a hearth than a command center, a place where prophecy and politics hang heavier than the tea in Harry's cup. Later, Grindelwald Place presents itself as a final refuge, but its very walls mutter that every sanctuary in this war is built on ghosts. This architecture of conditional belonging reshapes Harry's temperament with a quiet, grinding force. Without a kitchen where he can arrive muddy, furious, or foolish, and still be handed a plate, he learns to curate himself at all times. The messy, laughing boy who plays chess and loses badly never quite materializes. In his place stands a public artifact, the boy who lived as symbol, a weapon being polished in the dark by the expectations of adults and the awe of his peers. Every room is an audience. Every holiday is a performance review. So the most telling image of this altered childhood is not a duel or a prophecy, but another Christmas at Hogwarts. Owls sweep in bearing parcels from admirers, mentors, and institutions. A book on advanced defensive magic, a box of professional-grade Quidditch gloves, perhaps a rare chocolate from a grateful family he once saved. Useful, impressive, cold. There is no hand-knitted jumper that fits a little wrong. No homemade fudge wrapped in too much tape. No evidence that someone stayed up late simply thinking of him. He falls asleep with gifts piled at the foot of his bed, surrounded by proof that he is important. The absence that matters is simpler and far more dangerous. There is still no proof that he is loved. Reforging the trio. When the heart is missing, the presents prove his value. The silence proves his isolation. In that silence, the classic golden trio never quite forms, because the role Ron was meant to play has been quietly erased before the sorting hat even opens its brim. People remember the trio as three friends bound by adventure. They are wrong. Structurally, it is three functions bound by necessity. Hermione as the mind, Ron as the heart, Harry as the will. In this timeline, the heart is missing. What remains is a two-part engine of intellect and destiny, grinding forward with methodical certainty, or a single blade moving through the dark without anything soft to catch on. If Hermione becomes the primary ally, it begins on the train as an accident of proximity rather than a sandwich shared with a nervous redhead. Harry, already wary, gravitates towards the girl who speaks in rules and footnotes, because rules at least have clear edges. Their partnership is hyper-competent almost immediately. Homework finished, spells practiced with almost clinical repetition, problems dissected like essays rather than lived experiences. They break fewer rules at first. There is no Ron to say, "Let's just go," no impulsive leap toward a forbidden door. When they do rebel, following Snape, confronting Quirrell, it is calculated, tactically lethal rebellion, the mind and the will aligning like a weapon being polished in the dark. The troll in the bathroom still comes, but the emotional geometry is altered. Hermione is rescued because she is a classmate in danger, not yet a sole resonance of found family. Harry intervenes from principle and obligation, not because his best friend has dragged him into chaos. Without Ron's easy jokes and insecure bluster, there is less laughter in the aftermath, fewer messy apologies, more formal acknowledgements. A partnership, not a friendship. A study group that occasionally faces death. If Draco slides into the open space instead, the Slytherin timeline brushes against Gryffindor. Status replaces warmth as the primary currency. Harry learns, very early, to read people as assets or threats, to navigate the Gryffindor-Slytherin divide as a chessboard rather than a school rivalry. Draco offers commentary on bloodlines, on fathers of the ministry, on which professors can be bent. Harry, hungry for context, listens. He becomes an unwilling piece in a house war he never chose. His name a banner others carry into their private skirmishes. Compassion is not absent, but it is filtered through calculation. Who can be saved without losing position, without ceding authority? If no one truly fills the gap, Hogwarts becomes a fortress rather than a home. Harry moves alone through corridors, intervening in crises not because my friend is in there, but because something in him cannot watch the world burn without acting. He is a solitary instrument of fate, a masterpiece to be molded by danger and expectation, not by shared sweets and Quidditch gossip. Across all variants, the cost is the same. Without Ron's jealous explosions in fourth year, without the sulks and slammed doors that force conversations, Harry's fears never detonate outward. They sediment inward. Every slight, every suspicion, every moment he feels used by Dumbledore or overshadowed by prophecy has nowhere to go. It calcifies. The anger is quieter, more patient, more dangerous. The question is not whether that pressure will break him. The question is what, or who, it will finally break against. Year 1 rewritten. Trolls, chessboards, and a colder stone. Pressure without release reshapes the first year at Hogwarts into something colder, sharper, and far less forgiving. In this timeline, the Philosopher's Stone is not the backdrop for a warm adventure. It becomes the first live-fire exercise in a war Harry doesn't yet understand he is already fighting. Halloween is the first fracture. Canon insists that Ron's careless insult drives Hermione into the bathroom, that his panicked bravery redeems him under Falling Stone and Swinging Club. They are wrong. Remove Ron, and the emotional geometry of that day collapses. Either Hermione never flees to cry alone, buffered by a looser acquaintance with Harry built on shared classes and mutual academic respect, or, more chillingly, she does retreat, wounded by some smaller slight. And the alarm still sounds. Harry hears about the troll, hears that a girl is missing, and has to decide, without a red-haired anchor at his side, whether to risk his life for someone who is not yet his friend. If he goes alone, or with a less balanced ally, perhaps Neville, shaking but stubborn, or a Slytherin classmate, curious about the boy who lived's threshold for danger. The confrontation in the bathroom is no longer a chaotic ballet of luck and loyalty, it is methodical survival. Harry uses water, mirrors, broken pipes, anything to disorient the creature. Victory, if it comes, is not followed by laughter and a forged trio. It ends in silence, in a cool nod between two children who have seen death brush past and refuse to speak of the way their hands shook. That absence of shared warmth becomes decisive at the stone. The obstacle course beneath the trapdoor is designed to test a spectrum of virtues. Without Ron, one entire axis, sacrificial, impulsive heart, is missing. The chessboard room, canonically his stage, becomes the critical fault line. Hermione can map patterns with terrifying clarity, but she is not a player of living pieces. Her instinct is to analyze, not to gamble lives. Harry, driven by duty, and a colder curiosity about why he is being hunted, may attempt a brute force solution. Reckless charges, wand work against enchanted stone, perhaps trying to fly over the board rather than submit to its rules. The board does not care. It punishes incompetence with crushing finality. In one branch of the Slytherin timeline, they fail here, turned back not by Voldemort's genius, but by the simple fact that a missing 11-year-old with a head full of chess strategies never existed to translate courage into a tactically lethal plan. Yet there is another possibility, one that feels almost merciful. McGonagall's warnings land. Hermione's rule-abiding instincts hold. No one goes through the trapdoor. Dumbledore returns, removes the stone, and Quirrell is exposed and neutralized by adult authority. Harry's first year ends with formal speeches rather than burns and scars. He is protected. He is also untested. Or he goes down alone, carrying no memory of Ron's sacrifice because there was none, facing Quirrell with duty rather than friendship burning behind his eyes. The mirror of Erised reflects a boy who wants not a family clustered around him, but clarity. Why him? Why this? Why now? When Voldemort's voice coils around his mind, it meets not naive warmth, but a weapon being polished in the dark. Still incomplete, still a masterpiece to be moulded. Whichever branch you favour, the lesson written into Harry's bones is identical. He cannot rely on a laughing redhead to stand between him and the board's most dangerous moves. He learns, very early, that if anyone is going to be sacrificed, it will be him, or whoever he chooses. The next years will show what a child does with that knowledge, when war stops being hypothetical and starts carving names into stone. Systematic loneliness, how Hogwarts trains a different Harry. Hogwarts, in this timeline, does not save Harry Potter. It systematizes him. From the moment the boats cut across the Black Lake, the castle behaves less like a school and more like an institutional machine designed to process the boy who lived. The feasts, the floating Campbells, the cheering tables, these are not wonders to a child who has already learned that attention is a form of surveillance. They are intake procedures, softening the subject before the real curriculum begins. Without Ron's easy laughter on the train, Harry does not arrive pre-bonded to a family. He arrives as a public asset. The Sorting Hat hesitates, finds that familiar soul resonance with ambition and caution, and its whisper of Slytherin or Gryffindor lands not as destiny, but as data. Wherever he falls, the result is the same. House rivalries become controlled arenas where he learns how loyalty is weaponized and how fame distorts every interaction into a transaction. Classes become drills, not adventures. Transfiguration is not McGonagall's marvel, but a strict language of control. Potions, under Snape's cold authority, is a series of trials where Harry's every misstep is amplified by his name. Detentions are no longer shared war stories with Ron. They are solitary debriefings, where he learns the cost-benefit calculus of rule-breaking without the cushion of a friend to laugh it off afterward. Even Quidditch shifts. His natural flying talent, once a joyous escape, is repurposed into performance under pressure, an aerial exam in which the entire world watches for cracks. Cannon's impulsive rule-breaking bends under this pressure. In the absence of Ron's chaotic dares, Harry's defiance becomes targeted. He moves because Hermione's logic proves the risk is necessary, or because a Slytherin ally, perhaps Draco, intrigued rather than alienated, frames the infraction as a move in a longer game. The troll in the bathroom, the midnight corridors, even the pursuit of the stone are no longer childish adventures. They are controlled breaches, each one a field exercise in becoming tactically lethal. What fills the silence where Weasley jokes should be? Discipline. Hermione's academic rigor becomes his default refuge. He learns that burying himself in arithmancy charts or defensive theory quiets the roar of the Great Hall. If Draco occupies that early orbit, Harry acquires political etiquette alongside spellwork, how to move through pure blood salons, how to turn a handshake into a contract. And under the relentless scrutiny of fame, he experiments, consciously or not, with occlumency-like suppression, discovering that if he walls off his inner life, the world can only consume his legend. So he builds a fortress, not of stone, but of manner. Polite, brave, impeccably composed, he allows classmates access only to the outer courtyard of himself, the Quidditch captain, the reliable partner in dueling club, the boy who never cracks under Snape's cruelty. The inner keep, his fear, his grief, his corrosive anger at being used, is locked behind routines and rehearsed expressions. They will call him mature. They are wrong. He is a weapon being polished in the dark. By the time the war stops being rumour and starts arriving in the form of petrified classmates and whispered prophecies, Hogwarts has done its work. It has produced a Harry who is more competent, more controlled, and infinitely less willing to let anyone see him bleed. The next phase will test what happens when that carefully engineered restraint finally meets open war, and when the fortress decides to fire first. Year 2 without a rescue, the chamber claims its price. War arrives on Privet Drive as an inconvenience before it ever becomes a prophecy. The bars on Harry's window go up, the cat Flap appears in the door, and Vernon Dursley congratulates himself on having finally contained the abnormal. Canon insists that salvation comes in the form of a battered blue Ford Anglia and 3 freckled boys hanging in the night sky. They are wrong. In this timeline, Ron Weasley never makes the impulsive, law-shattering decision to steal his father's car for a boy he only half understands. The Weasley chaos that once cracked open Harry's prison never materializes. Molly frets, Arthur lectures about Muggle law, and the family's attention turns inward to their own precarious finances and Ginny's first year. Dobby, denied his clean narrative arc as well, escalates. The pudding becomes a catastrophe. The bludger incident is preempted by subtler sabotages, and when that fails, he simply keeps blocking Harry's letters until the silence itself becomes a weapon. The intervention, when it comes, is institutional, not fraternal. Dumbledore appears on Privet Drive with the quiet inevitability of a warrant, magic rolling off him like a storm front, and reminds the Dursleys that the protection they enjoy is conditional. Harry is removed not by laughter and car headlights, but by headmaster's decree and ministry threat. He learns with methodical certainty that escape will come from authority, not from peers. It is a colder lesson than the Burrow's kitchen ever offered. At Hogwarts, the absence of the Ron-Harry axis leaves a hollow where warmth and idiocy used to sit. There is no shared obsession over Quidditch snacks and wizard chess to dilute the fear. No red-haired commentary turning horror into something survivable. Instead, the investigation into the chamber bifurcates along two equally unsettling lines. In one strand, Harry and Hermione operate like junior scholars of war, cross-referencing legends of Slytherin's basilisk with library maps and ghost testimonies. Their conversations dense, precise, almost clinical. In another possibility, more aligned with the Slytherin timeline's soul resonance, Harry and Draco treat the attacks as a political contagion. Every petrified body is a data point, every whisper in the common room a potential lever. The entrance itself becomes the pivot. Without Ron's broken wand, without his panicked loyalty driving him through collapsing stone to drag Lockhart along, the path to Ginny is not a madcap scramble of friendship, but a calculated descent. Harry goes down alone, or with an ally, Draco perhaps, or a reluctantly impressed Hermione, whose investment is ideological rather than familial. The air is thicker, the silence is heavier. This is not a brother rescuing a sister. It is a tactically lethal asset, neutralizing a breach. And timing, in war, is everything. Remove Ron's impulsive courage, and the delay compounds. Dumbledore suspended a day earlier, Hagrid taken without a hint about spiders, the staff slower to connect Myrtle's bathroom to the legend. The diary has longer to feed. Ginny's small hands grow slack sooner against the wet stone, and Tom Riddle's outline fills in with a dreadful, patient clarity. When Harry finally reaches the chamber, he may find a girl barely breathing, or a body already cooling, while Riddle stands fully solid, a masterpiece to be moulded from Voldemort's fragmented past. Whether the basilisk falls to the sword or remains coiled in the dark, the price has shifted. If Ginny dies, Voldemort gains an earlier foothold through a resurrected Riddle. If she lives, it is because Harry chose to descend as executioner first and savior second, and he will remember the order. He leaves the chamber not buoyed by shared trauma with Ron and Hermione, but with the quiet understanding that the world now expects miracles from a boy who walks out alone. The fortress has fired its first shot. The question, as the diary's ashes cool, is how long before Harry stops pretending he isn't aiming back. The Weasley fracture, a family without Harry at its table. The world will later insist that the Weasleys were always Harry's family, that their kitchen table was destiny's true axis. They are wrong. In this timeline, the Burrow is not a narrative half. It is simply a leaning, overstuffed house at the edge of a field, where a poor, proud, pure-blood clan braces against a war that does not yet have their name carved into it. Strip Harry from their benches, and the breakfast table rearranges itself. Fred and George still dominate the air, their jokes a defensive barrage against poverty and looming darkness. Percy still polishes his prefect badge as if it were a minor ministry of its own. Bill and Charlie remain distant constellations of success. Ron is not the boy who brings home the boy who lived. He is simply the sixth son who has failed yet again to alter the family's gravitational field. Without an outsider to validate him, Ron's arc bends inward. There is no legendary companion whose reflected glory can argue, silently, that Ron matters. The chessboard sacrifice never happens. There is no moment where his tactical brilliance is literally the key to stopping Voldemort's first bid for resurrection. In the silence left by that missing narrative, his insecurities do not evaporate in shared danger. They ferment. Resentment toward Percy's authority, toward the twins' effortless charisma, toward Ginny's status as the long-awaited daughter, hardens into a low, grinding jealousy. When the war accelerates, a boy who once might have become the emotional center of Harry's resistance is instead a volatile variable, easier to overlook, easier to sway, easier perhaps to lose. Ginny's trajectory also fractures. Without the intense, awkward proximity to Harry, no shared summers at the Burrow, no rescue from the chamber that feels like soul resonance made literal. Her crush cannot burn along the same rails. It either cools into distant hero worship of a celebrity she barely knows, or it mutates into ambition. If she cannot stand beside the legend, she will become one in her own right. The diary still whispers, still promises power in a world that underestimates red-haired girls from poor families, but the tone shifts. Her possession reads less like a damsel's tragedy and more like a ruthless experiment conducted on a child who wanted to matter. Later, without the private shorthand of a shared rescue and slow-burn romance, her leadership in any resistance movement is sharper, more self-authored, and far less tethered to Harry's emotional weather. Arthur and Molly, denied their symbolic son, occupy a different political altitude. The Burrow is no longer the unspoken safe house of the Chosen One, merely a modest waypoint in an increasingly militarized landscape. Molly's protectiveness narrows. She fights for her children, not for the boy sleeping in Ron's attic room. Arthur's fascination with Muggles becomes a minor eccentricity in the Order, not a charming quirk of the man who unknowingly hosts the war's central asset. Their influence contracts accordingly. They are brave, loyal, and overworked, but they are not the axis around which Dumbledore quietly arranges his human shields. When open war finally comes, the Weasleys still fight with methodical certainty. Fred and George still weaponize chaos. Ginny still hurls hexes with tactically lethal precision. Molly still becomes a one-woman fortress when her children are threatened. But they are one family among many, not the emotional heart of Harry's rebellion. Without their kitchen as a recurring sanctuary, the resistance feels colder, more transactional, more like the Slytherin timeline bleeding into Gryffindor's last stand. The question that lingers as the Burrow's windows glow in isolation rather than as the world's adopted living room is simple and unsettling. What does a Chosen One become when there is no warm table waiting for him between battles? The answer will dictate not just who wins the war, but what the world that follows is allowed to feel like. Prisoners and prophecies, years 3 and 4 on a tilted axis. In year 3, that answer begins to crystallize in a far colder light. Without Ron as emotional ballast, the third year does not pivot around a broken leg and a red-haired boy snarling at a supposed mass murderer. It pivots around intellect and suspicion. In the Shrieking Shack, there is no Weasley body on the floor to drag the conversation down from mythic betrayal to immediate physical fear. There is only Hermione's breathless logic and, depending on earlier alliances in this timeline, Draco's cultivated distrust. Canon grants Harry a visceral shove toward mercy, Ron screaming that Sirius Black will have to kill all three of them before he touches Harry. Here, that line never exists. Hermione is assembling timelines, wand movements, and ministry records with methodical certainty. Draco, if present, is cataloguing every Lestrange-flavoured rumour he has ever heard about Azkaban and traitors. Harry's choice to trust Sirius becomes either an austere act of faith against all rational counsel or a defiant rejection of every adult narrative he has been fed. The scene loses its chaotic warmth and becomes a tribunal in a rotting house. The absence of Ron does something subtler as well. It hollows out the Scabbers subplot. There is no long-suffering boy with a hand-me-down rat, no petty arguments over a pet's disappearance, no small domestic quarrels that later explode into world-shaking revelation. Pettigrew's exposure in this Slytherin timeline is almost clinical. A name on an old map, a discrepancy in a death record. Betrayal ceases to be the violation of a child's trust and reverts to a cold historical fact. Another entry in the ledger of the last war. Harry learns what his parents suffered, but he does not feel it as the theft of a friend's beloved animal. He feels it as yet another distant crime committed before he could walk. Year 4 amplifies that distance. Remove Ron's jealousy during the Triwizard Tournament, and you do not get a smoother year. You get a quieter, more dangerous isolation. No one close to Harry is willing to say, with infuriating honesty, that they resent his fame or doubt his innocence. The emotional confrontation never happens, so the wound never bleeds in the open. It calcifies. Harry either retreats into a narrow fortress of two, clinging to Hermione's precision, or to Draco's aristocratic cynicism, or he chooses solitude and treats the tournament as a series of puzzles to be solved. Tactically lethal, not personally survived. The Yule Ball becomes the purest emblem of this shift. Without Ron's awkwardness as a mirror, Harry's own discomfort has nowhere to go. There is no friend in hideous dress robes to mock, no shared humiliation to normalize the terror of adolescence. His unease either festers in silence, masked beneath the thin glamour of the boy who lived, or is papered over by girls who want a legend, not a lonely boy. Romance remains theoretical. Friendship remains functional. Class divides remain observed but not challenged. There is no Weasley poverty at his elbow to make him flinch at the price of a set of dress robes. And so, in the graveyard, when Voldemort rises through steam and ash, the boy he faces is edged differently. This Harry has not practiced the art of apology across a dormitory, has not learned that a slammed door can later open. He is less used to being forgiven, less trained in repairing what he breaks. When Voldemort tortures him, mocks his dead, and forces the wands to lock in that terrible soul resonance of green and gold, Harry's resistance is not fueled by memories of laughter in a cramped kitchen, but by something harder, the conviction of a weapon being polished in the dark. Mercy has had fewer rehearsals, hatred more. They think the graveyard returns the same boy. They are wrong. The world that follows will pay for that miscalculation. A colder war, DA, Umbridge, and the politics of isolation. By 5th year, the graveyard has already rewritten Harry's nervous system. In this timeline, it also rewires the architecture of resistance itself. The world expects a ragged, laughing underground, a reprise of the Marauders, with better branding. They are wrong. The idea of teaching others does not arrive over chessboards and chocolate frog wrappers. It arrives in a library carol, late, airless, with Hermione's voice low and precise as she lays out the arithmetic of war. One boy against a resurrected Voldemort is a doomed equation. A trained cohort might not be. There is no Ron to nudge, to translate Harry's inarticulate competence into enthusiasm, to vouch for him across the Gryffindor common room. So the first meetings are delayed by weeks, then shaped by absence. When the DA forms, it is not a club, it is a shortlist. Without Ron's social gravity, the invitation map shrinks. Hermione compiles names with methodical certainty, weighting reliability over warmth, silence over charisma. Neville is included early, not because he is Ron's doormate, but because Harry has seen him stand, shaking between friends and danger. Luna drifts in at Hermione's insistence, her odd, piercing clarity recognized as a tactical asset rather than a joke. Ginny, lacking the casual proximity of shared summers at the Burrow, remains more distant, more an emblem of the Weasley clan than Harry's personal ally. The emotional core tightens, the circle hardens. Under Dolores Umbridge, this configuration becomes tactically lethal. Canon gives us corridor shouting, explosive detentions, and a boy still half expecting adult rescue. Here, Harry's distrust of authority has been left to ferment in the Dursley cupboard with no Weasley warmth to dilute it. He does not shout when Umbridge calls him a liar. He watches, he catalogues, he lets Hermione read educational decree after educational decree, and responds not with rebellion in broad daylight, but with a low, controlled campaign of evasion. Detentions are accepted, scars logged, patrol routes mapped in a notebook that might as well be a campaign diary. In this colder war, Slytherin is not a monolith of enemies. A few disaffected purebloods, irritated by Umbridge's simpering authoritarianism, find their way into the DA's orbit, drawn by Harry's aura of contained power. What emerges in the Room of Requirement has less in common with a youth club and more with a resistance cell. The room answers not to laughter, but to intent. It manifests target dummies, concealment screens, even crude floor plans of Hogwarts, as Hermione and a quietly ruthless Harry begin turning the castle into a mental fortress. The absence of Ron's emotional detonations changes the internal weather. There is no public rupture over the Triwizard Tournament to force Harry to articulate his isolation, no later abandonment in a tent to drag buried resentments into the open. Grievances in the DA remain unvoiced, pressed flat under discipline. In the short term, efficiency soars, drills run like clockwork, spells land with brutal accuracy, and no one wastes time arguing about leadership because Harry's authority feels inevitable, like gravity, but pressure accumulates in silence. Neville steps forward sooner, taking charge of smaller practice groups when Harry is in detention. Luna becomes the unexpected moral voice, her calm questions cutting through fear. Ginny watches from a half-step removed, her potential leadership held in check by distance rather than lack of fire. The symbolic next generation of resistance is less a trio, more a constellation. Brilliant, but loosely bound. Visualize the Room of Requirement now. Not cushions and wireless music, but a makeshift war room. Maps of corridors pinned to conjured boards, patrol timings sketched in cramped handwriting, lists of spells categorized by function: disarm, disable, escape. Wands illuminate faces but are far too still for 15-year-olds. There is almost no room left for teenage foolishness. The sole resonance in the air is not of friendship, but of shared risk. The tragedy is simple. A masterpiece to be moulded is taking shape here, under Umbridge's nose. Yet it is also a structure with hairline fractures, invisible until the first real shock. And that shock is coming. The night when a single vision, a single choice in the Department of Mysteries will test whether this colder DA bends or shatters. The locket that never breaks him. Horcrux hunt without Ron. The shock arrives years later, not as a crimson curtain in the death chamber, but as a length of cursed metal resting against Harry's chest. The locket is quiet at first. Then it learns his rhythms, his fears, the precise pitch of his loneliness, without a red-haired buffer to mock it into silence. In canon, the tent explodes. Ron storms out. The Deluminator glows. And the narrative offers a crude but effective proof that love can boomerang back through the dark. In this timeline, that scene simply never ignites. There is no shouting match over Hallows versus Horcruxes, no clatter of a rucksack against frozen ground, no Deluminator redemption arcing through the night. Either Harry and Hermione move through the alpine forests and muddy fields as a steady, eerily efficient partnership, or, more likely, Harry peels away much earlier, convinced that dragging anyone beside him into this slow-motion execution is an indulgence he cannot afford. Tactically, the absence is subtle but lethal. Ron's value was never raw power. It was pattern recognition, the instinctive, almost chessboard way he assessed risk. The boy who once sacrificed himself on an enchanted chess set becomes, in the original line, the one who says, "We can't trust this, mate," at precisely the right moment. Remove him, and certain escapes, like the split-second apparition from the Ministry or the timing of camp relocations, shift from methodical certainty to educated guesswork. Paradoxically, there are fewer impulsive eruptions, fewer jealous outbursts that rip open buried grievances. But what looks like stability is really compression, pressure without vents, silence where there should have been a fight. The Sword of Gryffindor is where that pressure finally finds a different outlet. There is no Ron to dive into the black water, no heavy-handed symbolism of the friend who left returning to pull Harry from an icy grave. The locket, unbroken, continues to hum against his sternum. In this Slytherin timeline of the woods, someone else must intervene or the quest stalls. Perhaps Snape, bound by Dumbledore's last command and tracking Harry through soul resonance and doe-shaped Patronus, is forced into a more direct rescue. He does not simply drop the sword into a pool and vanish. He drags an exhausted, half-hypothermic Harry to the shore, leaves the blade beside him, and disapparates before questions can be asked. Salvation becomes clinical, not communal, a transaction of duty, not a gesture of friendship. Internally, the damage is precise. Without the experience of being abandoned and then chosen again by Ron, Harry's understanding of loyalty remains abstract, almost juridical. People either fulfill their role in the war, or they do not. Forgiveness is thinned into tolerance. Reconciliation, as a concept, never gains muscle. When he walks into the forest, he does so with the same grim authority, but with less ballast. He is not a friend walking into death because he has been loved back to life. He is a weapon being polished in the dark, returning to its maker because the prophecy requires it. The post-war implications are brutal. A Harry tempered by this locket that never quite breaks him but never lets him be healed is a commander who can win a war and then stand, blinking, before a world he does not know how to inhabit. He will rebuild Hogwarts as a fortress, draft laws with a strategist's pen, perhaps even accept a public role of reluctant authority. But the warm, chaotic Weasley kitchen is gone as a model. There is no internal map for how to live in peace with equals. The tragedy waiting in the epilogue of this timeline is not whether Harry survives Voldemort, but whether he ever learns how to put the wand down. And the final twist is simple: a world that thinks it has been saved by a boy who understood love. They are wrong. It has been saved by someone who understood duty, and that difference will echo into whatever fragile peace comes next. Voldemort upgraded, exploiting a friendless chosen one. Voldemort understands this difference immediately. The prophecy names a boy, not a family. In this timeline, the Dark Lord is facing a chosen one stripped of the Weasley buffer, a weapon being polished in the dark by circumstances alone. A hero without a heart friend is not simply lonelier, he is structurally exposed. In canon, Voldemort underestimates the power of Ron's loyalty and the Burrow's noisy warmth. Here, he conducts the opposite experiment. Harry has Hermione's sharp mind, perhaps Neville's quiet solidarity, but no red-haired constant dragging him back to chessboards and corned beef sandwiches. That absence becomes Voldemort's opening. Fear and isolation are his native elements. He has built an empire on the premise that people will betray anything rather than stand alone. When he looks at this Harry, he sees not a boy wrapped in communal love, but a solitary point of resistance with very little the Dark Lord can threaten beyond Harry's own life. The diary, then, ceases to be just a trap for Ginny Weasley and becomes a prototype for something more intimate: dark mentorship. In the Slytherin timeline of Harry's internal life, Tom Riddle's ink-bound presence offers what Hogwarts has not: an older, brilliant boy who understands being orphaned, scrutinized, exceptional. In this timeline, even if Ginny still stumbles into the diary, Harry lingers longer over the elegant handwriting, the methodical certainty of Riddle's explanations, the cool acknowledgement of trauma shared. He may reject the invitation consciously, but the soul resonance is there. Two children shaped by neglect, each taught that other people are either tools or threats. Voldemort learns from this. When the Horcrux link intensifies, his strategy evolves from brute terror to psychological siege. He begins to wage a war of narrative. Harry is framed as a dangerous anomaly, a boy whose very presence invites catastrophe, whose influence corrodes those who stand too close. The Ministry whispers it, the Prophet prints it, and without a Ron to shove a chocolate frog into his hand and drag him into the common room, Harry retreats. Hogwarts becomes less a school than a fortress he haunts, moving along corridors like an occupying force in his own life. The temporal rhythm of the wider war shifts accordingly. With no Weasley jailbreak in a flying car, Ginny's fate in the chamber is far less certain. Her death, or permanent damage, hardens the castle. The DA still forms, but it is colder, more like a student militia than a secret club. What rises to meet Voldemort is not a scrappy, love-fueled resistance, but a brittle coalition of anxious adults and a handful of overburdened teenagers who train because they must, not because they belong. At the center of this stands a new Voldemort-Harry dynamic that reads less like light versus dark and more like an argument between two philosophies of loneliness. Voldemort weaponizes solitude, proving that isolation can be a throne from which authority is projected through fear. Harry, who has never learned what it is to be held on a sofa at the Burrow, gropes toward a different answer, that one can transcend loneliness through duty and chosen bonds, even if affection always feels slightly theoretical. Their final confrontation is not just a duel of wands, but a question of which vision of being alone the world will be forced to live under. And as the war accelerates, the next escalation is inevitable. Voldemort stops trying merely to kill Harry and begins trying to claim him. As mirror, as rival, as proof that his philosophy was always right. Dumbledore's calculus, guiding a boy without a Weasley safety net. Voldemort tries to claim Harry as mirror and rival. Dumbledore, in response, tries to claim him as purpose. The tragedy of this timeline is that neither man truly claims him as a child. In the absence of Ron Weasley's relentless, imperfect, grounding loyalty, that omission becomes a structural flaw in the entire war. Dumbledore has always been a strategist, masquerading as a grandfather. In canon, he relies on the Weasleys with methodical certainty, Molly for unconditional warmth, Arthur for gentle curiosity, the Burrow itself as a ramshackle fortress where Harry can remember he is more than a prophecy. Remove Ron from the Hogwarts Express, and the bridge to that red-haired safety net never forms. In this timeline, there is no Christmas jumper, no den of chaos and affection to counterbalance the cold geometry of Dumbledore's plans. That absence changes the calculus. If there is no Burrow to send Harry to, the headmaster's decision tree narrows to Privet Drive or Grimmauld Place, to neglect or ghosts. Each summer becomes either the cupboard in all but name or the house that swallowed Sirius Black's childhood whole. Dumbledore's insistence that Harry remain with the Dursleys, once ethically ambiguous, now borders on the monstrous. He is not merely tolerating a bad home in exchange for blood wards. He is vetoing the only plausible alternative, family, before it can even exist. And because Harry has no Ron to absorb his rants, to mock his self-importance, to drag him into wizard chess and sandwiches, he learns early to present a smooth surface. After the chamber, he sits in Dumbledore's office, not as a shaken 12-year-old whose classmate has died in the pipes beneath the school, but as a boy who has already internalized that his terror is an inconvenience. The Phoenix sings. The portraits, Dumbledore sees composure and mistakes it for resilience. They are wrong, those who insist Dumbledore would simply proceed as in the original narrative. In this colder configuration, he compensates by drawing Harry in sooner, sharing more of the prophecy in third or fourth year, inviting him into the outer orbit of the Order of the Phoenix. Isolation reads, to an old general, as premature adulthood. A weapon being polished in the dark looks, from a distance, like a masterpiece to be moulded. After the graveyard, when the world returns from silence to screaming headlines, Dumbledore's office again becomes the confessional that never quite confesses. With no Weasley bunk to collapse into, no Ron to validate that what happened was insane and unfair, Harry recounts the resurrection with an eerie, clipped precision. It is easier then for Dumbledore to file it under necessary trauma and move on to logistics. After Sirius falls through the veil, the pattern ossifies into something tactically lethal. Dumbledore offers explanations, half-truths about soul resonance and blood magic, but not the raw apology of a man who has failed a child. Harry, who has no model of being comforted, does not ask for it. Two actors, both misreading the other's restraint as strength, quietly agree to treat his grief as fuel. By the time Dumbledore finally reveals the full Horcrux schema, he is not underestimating Voldemort. He has mapped that enemy with terrifying clarity. His fatal miscalculation lies elsewhere. He has overestimated how much loneliness a single boy can carry without warping into something unrecognizable, without deciding that if no Weasley hearth exists for him, he will build his own, out of oaths, fear, and unbreakable authority. The next move in this Slytherin timeline is not made by Voldemort at all. It is made by Harry when he finally stops waiting for anyone to save him from being alone. Alternate alliances: Hermione, Neville, Draco, and the shape of Harry's soul. Harry's decision not to wait for rescue reshapes more than strategy. It rewrites the architecture of his soul. The world will later insist that Harry Potter would always have been a hero. They are wrong. In this timeline, who reaches out a hand first does not just change his tactics, it changes what he believes a hand is for. If Hermione becomes the primary anchor, the shift is immediate and ruthless. Their soul resonance is built not on laughter, but on library tables and near failures. She is the one who drags him from impulse into methodical certainty. Every corridor mapped, every spell cross-referenced, every risk quantified like a miniature war. Without Ron's chaotic loyalty, Harry learns to prize competence over comfort, truth over tact, justice over mercy. He is still a leader, but one who audits feelings like evidence. The troll in the bathroom does not forge a messy, improbable friendship. It becomes a case study in preventable risk. He will save people. He will also judge them. Over years, this Harry hardens into a principled commander who expects others to keep up or get out of the way. Forgiveness becomes a luxury he rarely grants himself, let alone anyone else. The warmth of the burrow never arrives to prove that love can be irrational and still be safe. His heart becomes a fortress of schedules and contingency plans, and when he finally breaks school rules, it is not for fun. It is for war. If Neville drifts closer instead, the resonance hums at a quieter frequency. Two boys who know the taste of fear and the humiliation of being underestimated learn, slowly, to stand up without shouting. In this configuration, the late-night conversations are not about grand strategies, but small survivals, remembering names, tending plants, noticing the first years who flinch. Harry becomes more patient, more attuned to the overlooked, almost painfully gentle with anyone who mirrors his own early inadequacy. Yet that tenderness has a cost. Without Ron's reckless dares and half-baked plans, this Harry hesitates before gambles that require someone to bleed first. He will still walk into danger, but he will do it later, with more preparation, sometimes too late. The legend dims at the edges. The boy is kinder, but less tactically lethal. If Draco remains close, the axis tilts again. Here, the Slytherin timeline bleeds into the mainstream. Status is not an enemy, but a language, and Harry becomes fluent. In Draco's orbit, he learns the value of grey promises, of favours banked in silence, of compromises framed as inevitabilities. He is devastating in a common room debate, lethal in a backroom negotiation, and increasingly comfortable with outcomes that would have horrified the boy who once slept in a cupboard. His moral lines do not vanish, they blur. He still opposes Voldemort, but he may protect certain families, trade leniency for information, reshape the war into overlapping bargains, rather than a single blazing stand of good against evil. The narrative fractures. Heroes and villains become positions on a board, not identities. Most likely, though, no single replacement Ron emerges. Instead, Harry assembles a constellation of partial anchors. Hermione for mind, Neville for empathy, perhaps Luna for perspective that refuses the binary logic of war. It makes his support network broader, more resilient, but also more diffuse. No one person holds the entire map of his fears and cruelties. No one can look at him and say, with Weasley bluntness, "You're being an idiot," and be believed instantly. The question that lingers in the silence between these variants is simple and devastating. Is Harry's heroism an immutable constant, or is it merely a fragile equilibrium produced by who shares his homework, who sits beside him on the train, who laughs at his worst jokes and still has the authority to tell him when he is wrong? The next movements in this timeline will test that answer, one broken alliance at a time. The Battle of Hogwarts reforged. Who stands at Harry's side? The proof arrives in the only language this world truly respects: war. The Battle of Hogwarts becomes the final exam for a life where Ron Weasley was never allowed to be Harry's uncomplicated centre of gravity. In the Great Hall, the emotional geometry is altered at a molecular level. There is no Ron-Hermione kiss detonating after years of bickering, no gravitational pull of red hair forming an instant fortress around Harry's exhausted frame. In this timeline, when the bodies are laid out and alliances coalesce, the spaces beside him are not pre-assigned by 7 years of shared homework and holidays. They are negotiated in real time, with methodical certainty. Hermione stands close, but not as one half of a preordained trio. She is the chief strategist who stayed when others rotated out. Neville hovers at the other flank, the quiet commander of the DA's ground forces. Ginny, if she survives the Carrows and the corridors, is not a childhood crush reclaimed, but a hardened duelist bound to Harry by shared campaigns rather than stolen kisses. Draco's presence is the true pattern interrupt. In the Slytherin timeline of this battle, he is no longer a sneering antagonist hiding in the shadows, but a reluctant asset whose sole resonance with Harry has been forged through parallel isolation. He does not embrace Harry. He stands a measured distance away, wand aligned with Harry's, their cooperation a tactical decision rather than a family tableau. Around them, the hall feels less like a reunion and more like a war council hastily convened over the dead. Tactically, the absence of Ron's battlefield instincts forces a redistribution of genius. It is Hermione, not a panicked redhead, who first suggests the room of requirement as an armory and staging ground, her memory of its mutability weaponized with clinical precision. Neville, not Ron, becomes the default field captain, coordinating the DA through the castle's labyrinth with a gardener's understanding of terrain, knowing which staircases bloom into existence, which courtyards are death traps. The basilisk fangs, if retrieved at all, are claimed by a smaller, sharper unit. Hermione and Ginny descending into the chamber, not as comic echo of earlier adventures, but as a tactically lethal strike team, erasing Horcruxes with no time for nostalgia. The deaths land differently. Fred's fall is still a shattering. The Weasleys still collapse around the absence, but Harry is not pulled into the epicenter as a surrogate son. He stands at the perimeter, grief moving through him in waves that are wide rather than deep. Remus and Tonks as comrades in arms, whose orphaned child represents a category of loss, not a mirror of his own. Snape as a revelation of sacrifice that reconfigures his understanding of Dumbledore's war, not a personal absolution for failing to love a second family enough. They are wrong. Those who imagine Harry's pain is lessened. It is simply less domestic, more strategic, a ledger of the fallen rather than the implosion of a single half. When he walks into the forest, the silence is colder. In canon, that path is lit by the memory of Ron's departures and returns, the proof that flawed loyalty can still circle back to the right side of history. Here, Harry carries no single redhead ghost. He carries the weight of formations, of corridors held and classrooms burned, of faces he never learned well enough to miss individually. His sacrifice is less about one boy he loves and more about the faceless many he has failed to truly know. And when Voldemort falls, the victory is quieter. The cheering feels distant, echoing off stone rather than off the walls of an adopted home. There is no immediate Weasley hug to anchor him, no maternal arms to drag him back from abstraction into the messy reality of being a son. Harry stands in the rubble of a school that was never entirely his, and a crowd that is not yet his people, and realizes that survival has not answered the question of where he belongs. The war is over. The work of choosing a life has barely begun. The next movement in this timeline will not be about killing a Dark Lord, but about deciding whether the boy who lived allows himself, finally, to live. Aftermath without the Burrow, Harry's life. 19 years later, the platform looks the same. The people do not. In canon memory, the world insists on a tableau of domestic triumph. Harry and Ginny, Ron and Hermione, children swarming like living proof that the war resolved into warmth. They are wrong. In this timeline, the steam from the Hogwarts Express curls around a narrower configuration. Harry stands with one child, not three, and the space at his side is occupied not by a Weasley spouse, but by Hermione Granger, friend, co-guardian, and the last unbroken constant of his adult life. The scene is almost painfully orderly. Hermione's wedding band belongs to someone else, an earnest Muggle solicitor who has never stood in a wand fight, while Harry's left hand is bare, his only visible inheritance, the faint white line of the old scar. Ginny is present, but not entwined. She stands a little down the platform with her own family, a professional Quidditch star whose orbit never fully decayed into his. Their history in this world was slower, more formal, a brief post-war attempt at resonance that collapsed under the weight of expectations neither of them had truly chosen. Without the Burrow as gravitational center, Harry's romantic life never crystallized into a Weasley epilogue. There was no summer of enchanted chickens and explosive pastries to normalize the idea that he belonged in that kitchen. There was only a polite, careful courtship with Ginny that felt, to both of them, like an essay written to satisfy an examiner. When it failed, he did not pivot into Hermione's arms in some belated confession. Their soul resonance had long since settled into something more austere and, in its own way, more enduring. Two tactically lethal veterans who understood that not every bond needs to be a marriage to be a masterpiece. His career reflects the same stripped-down logic. This Harry, tempered by isolation and the absence of Weasley chaos as pressure valve, enters the oral office with a methodical certainty that unnerves his superiors. For a decade, he is a weapon being polished in the dark, volunteering for every high-risk raid, treating each surviving Death Eater like a personal equation to be solved. Then, abruptly, he walks away, the Ministry's marble corridors feeling too close to the Dursleys' cupboard, another fortress that used him without ever feeling like home. Parenthood arrives late and cautiously through a single child he co-parents with a Muggle-born healer who prefers anonymity to legend. Harry oscillates between two models he never quite reconciles: the rigid, watchful control of Privet Drive and an almost desperate attempt to manufacture the warmth he once glimpsed at the Burrow's threshold, but never fully inhabited. Their home is quieter than Molly's, but there are game nights that run long, mismatched socks on radiators, and an iron rule that no child in that house will ever flinch at the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Is he happier? The answer resists measurement. The war is won, his scar is archival, that the architecture of his life, its holidays spent with a rotating cast instead of one sprawling plan, its quiet Tuesdays shared with Hermione over case files instead of with Ron over chess, bears the clear negative space of one friendship that never quite formed. And as the train pulls away and Harry's child leans out of the window, eyes bright with a future, unburdened by prophecy, a familiar red-haired man steps into view at the far end of the platform, hesitates, and lifts a hand in uncertain acknowledgement. The world will say they were always destined to be friends. The next movement of this timeline will test whether destiny, without the Burrow, is really that strong. The hidden cost of humour, what the story loses without Ron. The wizarding world insists the golden trio is interchangeable, that any two brave children could have flanked the boy who lived, and history would have marched on unchanged. They are wrong. Ron Weasley is not an accessory. He is a narrative organ. He functions as the story's built-in pressure valve, the one character whose very presence punctures the gathering fog of war with badly timed jokes, chess blunders, and complaints about corned beef sandwiches. Remove that organ, and the circulatory system of tone changes. The blood still moves, but every heartbeat sounds like marching boots. In this timeline, without Ron, the tonal balance tilts toward unrelenting gravity. Victories still occur, but they arrive unbuffered, edged with a methodical certainty that feels less like relief and more like a brief ceasefire. The troll in the bathroom becomes a grim exercise in survival rather than the chaotic birth of a friendship. The Chamber of Secrets, a military rescue, not a desperate scramble, powered by a boy who is terrified of spiders and still goes anyway. J.K. Rowling has framed the trio as will, intellect, and heart, Harry as drive, Hermione as mind, Ron as emotional ballast and humour. Subtract that third point of the triangle, and the narrative becomes sleeker, more efficient, almost tactically lethal in its focus on plot and war. But it also becomes less human. The Hogwarts corridors begin to feel like a fortress under siege, rather than a school where exams, Quidditch, and crushes coexist with basilisk attacks. Consider the hinge moments Ron quietly stabilizes. "Follow the spiders," he groans, and the audience laughs because the fear is ours as well. The scene breathes. His echo of Hermione's, "We could all have been killed, or worse, expelled," reframes terror as camaraderie, a shared joke against the dark. Even the awkward Yule Ball dances and petty arguments over dress robes are not narrative clutter. They are soul resonance, proof that these are still children learning to be people before they are soldiers. Without Ron, the camera lingers longer on Harry's scar and less on his sulks. Ron's jealousy in the Triwizard Year, his explosive departure during the Horcrux hunt, his gnawing insecurity about poverty and insignificance. These are not merely his flaws, they are Harry's flaws externalized. Ron is the mirror that forces the Chosen One to confront his own entitlement, anger, and capacity for pettiness. Remove that mirror, and Harry risks hardening into a distant figure of myth and authority, a weapon being polished in the dark, rather than a boy we recognize at a kitchen table. The hidden cost of a Ronless Slytherin timeline is not only tactical or emotional, it is aesthetic and philosophical. The series no longer argues that heroism can coexist with silliness, that saving the world can happen between jokes about sandwiches and complaints about homework. It argues instead that war devours all digressions. The silence that follows is powerful, but power without warmth has its own consequences, and this timeline is about to reveal them, mapping the full timeline fracture. Power without warmth does not stay contained inside one boy's chest. In this timeline, it radiates outward, warping the entire sequence of years with methodical certainty. To see the scale of the fracture, we have to walk the timeline, year by year, and watch the light drain out. 1991 begins on the train. Different compartment, different resonance. Harry, unmoored, ends up trading facts with Hermione or silent looks with Neville, not sandwiches with Ron. There is no easy laughter to undercut fame, no instant bridge to the burrow. By December, that absence hardens into structure. The trio that descends to the stone forms through intellect and duty, not friendship and play. Without Ron's chess sacrifice, McGonagall's board becomes a dead end. Quirrell still fails, but Harry never learns what it means to watch a friend fall so he can move forward. The lesson of the year is not, "We did this together." It is, "I was expected to succeed, and the castle rearranged itself until I did." 1992 darkens the pattern. No Ford Anglia rips Harry from Privet Drive. Dobby's warnings nearly succeed, and Harry returns to Hogwarts late, isolated, already primed to believe that danger is his natural climate. Ron is not there to pound on the barrier or drag him into reckless rescue. The chamber opens into a school that feels more like a besieged fortress than a home. When Ginny disappears, the descent is more clinical. Harry and Hermione decode clues. McGonagall coordinates staff, but there is no Weasley brother howling at the edge of the sink, forcing the crisis to feel personal. Ginny's survival, if it happens at all, is an institutional victory, not a family's reprieve. By 1993, the air itself feels colder. The revelation of Sirius is not mediated by Ron's outrage or his broken leg in the shrieking shack. There is no red-haired boy physically interposed between Harry and the supposed traitor. The confrontation becomes a clean line, predator, prey, and a truth that lands like a legal brief rather than a shouted argument. Without that chaotic, Weasley-centered heart in the room, Harry's decision to spare Sirius is more ideological than emotional, and the godfather bond that follows carries respect, but far less warmth. 1994 escalates the loneliness. The Triwizard Tournament still marks Harry a spectacle, but there is no jealous blow-up, no public rupture that forces him to confront the way fame corrodes friendship. Instead, he simply never had that friendship at full strength. The absence becomes invisible and therefore more dangerous. Hermione organizes, Cedric cooperates, but no one drags Harry to a tent to mock his dress robes or reframe terror as adventure. The Yule Ball is not humiliating. It is hollow. 1995 turns the DA into something else entirely. Without Ron's jokes, insecurities, and chessboard metaphors, the group is less club, more militia. They train harder, speak less, become tactically lethal far earlier. They are proud of that. They are wrong. By 1996, even Dumbledore's confidences land differently. The Half-Blood Prince year gives Harry power without the human ballast of a friend who will call him an idiot for using Sectum Sempra. The Burrow is not headquarters. It is a distant, respectable household. There is no Deluminator return waiting in the future because there is no bond to recall. Which brings the war years, 1997 to 98. The Horcrux hunt proceeds with brutal efficiency, but the tent is quieter, the arguments fewer, the morale brittle. Hogwarts, when it rises, does so under banners of strategy and necessity, not Weasley-coloured joy. The final battle is still won, but the castle that survives is a different world entirely. This is not a fan whim. It is a system evolving toward a different equilibrium once a single bond is removed. And now that the fracture has been mapped, we can finally ask, what exactly was Ron Weasley doing in the story that no spell, prophecy, or elder wand could replace? Why the canon chose Ron, design, destiny, and narrative engineering. The answer begins with a provocation. Removing Ron from the narrative does not expose his dispensability, it exposes his design. The emptiness we just traced is not an accident of this timeline. It is negative space around a carefully placed figure. Rowling does not stumble into Ron Weasley on a whim. She engineers him into the track of Harry's life with methodical certainty. On the Hogwarts Express, as the first uncalculated kindness. In the Gryffindor dormitory, as the bed next to the boy who has never had a roommate. At the chessboard, as the literal strategist who teaches Harry that winning sometimes requires letting someone else take the hit. These are not coincidences. They are narrative fixtures, like load-bearing walls in an invisible fortress. In the Slytherin timeline, Harry is a weapon being polished in the dark, his soul resonance tuned toward power and efficiency. Canon Harry is the opposite experiment. By chaining the chosen one's daily life to a poor, insecure, funny boy who breaks wands and forgets homework, the story insists on a different law of magic. Greatness must remain tethered to the mundane, or it curdles into monstrosity. Ron's chipped chess pieces, corned beef sandwiches, and second-hand robes are not background dressing. They are ballast. Without that weight, Harry's mythic altitude becomes dangerous. They are wrong, then, the readers who dismiss Ron as just the sidekick. His ordinariness is a weapon pointed at Harry's worst potential. It drags the legend back to the common room, to homework, to Quidditch jeers and sibling squabbles. In this timeline, where Ron never bonds with him, Harry still moves through the same corridors, but the resonance changes. Every corridor becomes a corridor of state, every friendship a negotiation, because there is no one allowed to be merely average beside him. Crucially, it is not only Ron's virtues that matter. His failures are load-bearing too. Jealousy in the Triwizard Year, cowardice in the tent, the sickening crack of his disapparition when he walks out on the Horcrux hunt. These are not narrative bugs. They are deliberate fractures that force Harry to confront betrayal, rage, forgiveness, and the brutal fact that love is not synonymous with flawless loyalty. A hero who never has to forgive a friend becomes a hero who does not know how to forgive at all. Viewed from above, Ron functions as an anti-Horcrux. Where Horcruxes split and isolate the soul, Ron's presence repeatedly reintegrates Harry. He is the gravitational pull back to the dinner table, the Quidditch stands, the joke in the hospital wing. Every time prophecy, war, and authority threaten to abstract Harry into a symbol, Ron drags him back into being a person who oversleeps and swears and gets it wrong. The canon, then, does not choose Ron because Harry needs a buddy. It chooses him because the plot needs a beating heart wired directly into its most dangerous asset. Remove that heart and the body of events still functions. Horcruxes are found, battles are fought. But the world that survives is colder, more efficient, and far less alive. And if a story can still win its war after amputating its heart, we are forced to ask a darker question. What, exactly, has that victory become? Stepping back through the door, re-entering the canon train compartment. Victory, we've just argued, can survive the loss of Ron Weasley. The story can still win its war. They are wrong. Slide the camera back to the beginning, back to the corridor of the Hogwarts Express, where the world still believes it is watching a harmless children's prologue. The train hums like a distant storm. Rain needles the windows. And there, nose pressed to the glass of a compartment door, stands Harry, small, bony, profoundly unsure of his own right to occupy space. On the other side, a lanky redhead boy with dirt on his nose lifts a corned beef sandwich in a half-apologetic gesture of possession and poverty. In this timeline, we have walked the rails where that door never opens, or opens only to rejection, and watched the wizarding world harden accordingly. Now we re-enter the canon compartment, with that darker map overlaid like a translucent curse. Ron clears his throat, the sound almost swallowed by the metallic rhythm of wheels on track, and asks if he can sit down. It is an ordinary sentence. It is also the hinge on which a war quietly turns. Watch it in slow motion. Harry blinks, weighing nothing more sophisticated than whether he will be a nuisance. He says, yes. A seat is taken, a sandwich unwrapped, and the air fills with the faint greasy smell of corned beef and the sharper scent of adolescent embarrassment. No prophecy flares, no wand glows to signal soul resonance. Just two lonely boys, each assuming the other is probably more at home in this world than they are. The exchange of sweets follows with the same deceptive triviality. Harry's vault-backed abundance spills onto the seat. Chocolate frogs, Bertie Bott's every flavour beans, the kind of excess that, until this train, has never bought him a friend. Ron's eyes widen, not with greed, but with a mixture of awe and discomfort. This is power, in its most harmless, sugared, and he has no language for Gringotts-level wealth, except a muttered joke. They share the frogs, they share the cards, and when Draco Malfoy arrives to reenact his miniature aristocratic coup, they share, for the first time, laughter at his expense. In the Slytherin timeline, we have seen what happens when laughter is replaced by calculation, when a boy at a door is treated as a weapon being polished in the dark, or a masterpiece to be molded. Here, on this train, the alternative is almost insultingly fragile. A snort, an eye roll, a clumsy defense of, there's nothing wrong with being poor. Yet that fragility is precisely what diverts the future away from methodical certainty and towards something messier, warmer, infinitely less tactically lethal. Listen to the compartment now, the muffled shouts from other students, the rain's soft assault on the glass, the occasional rattle as the train car sways, turning this narrow room into a moving fortress of wood and upholstery. Inside it, without fanfare, the fate of the wizarding world tilts just a few degrees toward loyalty instead of isolation, toward the Burrow instead of the Dursleys, toward a chosen one who will be allowed to be a child before he is asked to be a symbol. Every rewatch of this scene, after walking the darker route, acquires a new, almost ominous tenderness. You can see, now, the cost of hesitation. If Harry glances away, if Ron loses his nerve, the door stays closed, and the later chessboard, the DA, even the final Horcrux hunt, are staffed by colder versions of these children. And as we move to our closing reflections, keep that door in mind, because we are about to ask what this tiny, almost invisible act of courage demands from us the next time we press our noses to the glass of our own lives and decide whether to say yes. What this changes for us, reading Harry, Ron, and ourselves differently. So when we step back from that closed compartment door, the core revelation of this experiment is brutally simple. One missed friendship on a train produces a colder Harry, a harsher war, and a wizarding world that technically survives, but with less laughter, less forgiveness. The magic still functions, the wards still flare, but the soul resonance of the story thins, like a charm cast without conviction. In this timeline, the Hogwarts Express is not a warm threshold, but a moving antechamber to isolation. Harry finds a seat, but not a friend. The Sorting Hat still tastes courage and scar-twisted power, yet without Ron's easy presence, its whisper about Slytherin lingers longer. Its warning about greatness feels more like a threat. We watch the same boy walk into the same castle, carrying the same prophecy, and discover that what changes is not the spellwork, it is the temperature of every room he enters. This is where Ron's structural role stops looking like comic relief and starts looking like architecture. He is the bridge to the Weasleys, the red-haired corridor through which Harry accesses a real family and, with it, an alternative model of power. Loud, poor, chaotic, but fundamentally kind. Remove that bridge, and the burrow becomes a place Harry hears about rather than inhabits, a fortress of warmth he never enters. He remains a weapon being polished in the dark by fame and expectation, instead of a masterpiece to be moulded by Sunday lunch and hand-me-down jumpers. On the chessboard beneath the school, we see another load-bearing beam. In canon, Ron does not simply move pieces, he volunteers to be taken. That sacrifice licenses Harry's later self-offering in the forest, teaching him, at 11, that strategy and love can occupy the same square. Without it, the final war still arrives, but Harry's choices skew toward duty rather than affection, toward methodical certainty rather than messy loyalty. The victory is tactically lethal. It is also emotionally impoverished. And then there is Ron, the jealous friend, the boy who storms out of tents and dormitories. In the Slytherin timeline of this what-if, his absence erases those fractures that force Harry to confront his own entitlement and Hermione to question her own severity. The silence looks smoother. It is not. Conflict, we discover, was a form of care. This is where the experiment turns its gaze outward. Most of us are not prodigies, chosen ones, or dark lords. We are, more often, the Rons in someone else's carriage, the not most brilliant, not most famous presence who happens to sit down, share a sandwich, and recalibrate an entire life's trajectory. They are wrong. The people who assume only obvious geniuses shape history. The quiet friend on the train is a hidden axis. So the invitation is practical rather than sentimental. Reread or rewatch with this lens. Notice where Ron steps in with a joke that breaks the tension before Harry does something reckless. Where he fails, resents, leaves. Where he comes back. Track how often Harry's courage is scaffolded, not by prophecy, but by a muttered, "We're with you, aren't we?" or a clumsy apology that makes staying feel possible. Pattern interrupt. Imagine your own Hogwarts Express right now. A comment section is functionally a digital carriage, a provisional community where strangers sit down, exchange theories, argue, and, without realizing it, alter the contours of how someone else reads a story they thought they knew. As we move into our closing call to action, hold that image. A corridor, a door, a decision to sit or to walk past, and the wars, large and small, that hinge on who chooses to share the compartment. Your turn on the train. Choose the moment. Rewrite the war. In that corridor, outside that compartment, the camera finally turns on you. You have walked this entire Slytherin timeline with methodical certainty, and now the question loops back to the smallest hinge. If you could excise just one Ron Weasley moment, Not the boy, not the friendship, only a single scene. Which incision would shatter the story most violently for you? Is it the chessboard sacrifice, where he becomes, for one brutal move, a weapon being polished in the dark so that Harry and Hermione can cross the board and touch the stone? Is it the shrieking Ford Anglia, ripping Harry out of Privet Drive and into the sky, severing the Dursley fortress with an act of reckless, illegal devotion? Is it the Locket walkout in the dead winter, when Ron chooses resentment over loyalty and forces Harry to confront what leadership feels like in actual silence? Or is it something smaller and more personal? A sandwich shared on the train, a joke in a tent, a hand on Harry's shoulder before a Quidditch match, a moment you know is structurally trivial but emotionally seismic. In this timeline of thought experiments, your answer is not just an opinion. It is a branching event. In the comments, build it. Choose your moment, name the chapter, and then walk us through the fracture lines scene by scene. If Ron never moves the knight on McGonagall's chessboard, who falls instead? If the Ford Anglia never appears, how long before Harry's soul resonance with the burrow simply never forms? If the locket never drives Ron away, does Harry ever understand how close his own darkness runs to the surface? Do not be afraid to be tactically lethal with canon. Treat each decision as the first domino in a private war only you can see. For those who prefer to stay closer to the printed spine of the books, shift the lens. After walking through this analysis, how does Ron read to you now? Still as comic relief, or as a carefully engineered structural necessity, a masterpiece to be molded into heart, failure, jealousy, and return? Did this episode make you like him more, or merely respect the architecture of his presence, the ways his absence turns Harry colder, Hermione harsher, the entire world more brittle? Say so. Name the moment you first realized that removing Ron does not simply dim the jokes, it drains the color out of the wall. The same method applies to other hinges waiting in the dark. What if Hermione had been sorted into Ravenclaw and weaponized by a different house's authority? What if Neville had been the chosen one, and the prophecy's resonance settled on a quieter boy? What if Draco had taken Dumbledore's offer and become an informant buried within the Death Eaters? Each of those will become its own fractured line, its own experiment in power, loyalty, and cost. Subscribing, in that sense, is not a button. It is choosing to stay on the train as it pulls into stranger stations. So picture, one last time, the Hogwarts Express leaving the platform, red and implacable, steam veiling the windows. Behind the glass, compartments fill with children who have no idea how much depends on where they sit, who they tolerate, who they ignore. If this journey has sharpened the way you see that first ride, hit like, subscribe, and then go back, quietly, to that opening chapter. Stand in the corridor, listen for the knock on the compartment door, and ask yourself, as the handle turns, whether this is really the moment you would dare to change.